You're watching Kelly G Productions.
You're watching Connect Tour.
So where was the first studio you ever worked in?
The first one, I built a small studio. Couldn't afford to work in a studio, so we built one instead. At my friend's house, a guy named John, John Tabaka. I don't know if you ever got a chance to talk to him.
I know him.
Okay.
I'm not well, but you know,
Yeah.
over the years.
Yeah. We met in college, and we had very similar musical tastes. And he was a natural at recording stuff. He was just a natural at it. He was way beyond anything I was capable of at the time. Mind you, I've surpassed him by millions of times by now. But back then, he was much superior, vastly superior. So we built a small 8-track recording studio. For those of you who don't know what that is, back in the old days, you recorded stuff it was stored on tape. I know, you probably know what cassettes are. You may have heard of those, but before that were reel-to-reel tapes.
You guys used reel-to-reel?
Oh yeah, man.
Holy crap.
We had a half-inch tape for 8 tracks. And then later I got to work in a 24-track recording studio, which was 2-inch tape. So the reel of tape was that wide. It's about that big, like that big around. And you could store maybe three average songs on it. And the reel of tape cost, I don't even remember, hundreds of dollars, many hundreds of dollars. So it was like, you saved up just so you could buy a reel of tape, so you could put down 3 songs, when you were excited about it too. Because, of course, editing back then, that was the nightmare. No random access editing, no digital editing. It was all analog. So if I wanted to edit a tape, I used the razor blade and tape.
No wonder you're jaded.
Yeah, of course. You had to learn all kinds of tricks for hearing where the beginning of a sound started and ended. That teaches you an awful lot about sound.
Yeah.
And you don't even realize you're absorbing it. It's the best way to learn. Mm-hmm. Just put your hands on it,
Yes.
Play with it, let the organic process take over. Yeah.
That's how I know anything.
Yeah, exactly. Everything that you really learn and understand, guarantee you it wasn't taught to you.
Yeah.
It's just something that you went after because I must know how this works.
Of course.
And that's been the driving factor in everything I've ever done.
Oh, we're at the studio, the first studio. You built it with John Tabaka.
I did, yeah. It was in his bedroom, in his parents' house. He took his bed out and all of his furniture, because who needs that? And we put in, I think we kept the dresser because it was a flat surface to put a mixing console on. It was pretty large. We put a mixing console on there, 8-track reel-to-reel tape machine, giant reels going around them. And then a bunch of what's called outboard audio equipment, which was, nowadays they're basically just plugins for your software, but back then they were physical pieces of hardware.
Wow.
So like we had a noise reduction system, which was 8 channels worth of noise reduction. That took up 2 full rack spaces. So like in your AV rack, you've got your Fostex wireless mic system or whatever, and you've got like a couple of outlet strips that are mounted there for neatness, and maybe some lights come out of it so that you can see what's below it in the dark. And
So you guys built whole racks?
so that rack, yeah, those racks, I got the rack for free. I don't remember from where. I don't think I stole it. I'm pretty sure somebody gave. I might have stolen it.
Statute of limitation. Doesn't matter anymore. He stole it.
This is Trump's reality, man. I can make it up as I go. There are no rules here anymore. What? Not even the laws of physics apply in Trump's world. All right. So anyway, So I had you'd have an outboard rack. That would be like where your reverb unit was. And nowadays you just dial it up. You go to your reverb setting and you can build the reverb by shaping it with your grabbing part. I mean, back then, it was completely abstract. There was no way to relate what you saw in the, there were no visuals. There were no displays. It was just numbers. So you had to understand pre-delay, right? That means the amount of time from the attack to when the reverb actually starts. And you had to understand what decay rates were and, velocity. You had to understand about that. And the only way you did all that was you just kept playing with the knob that said velocity and going, so when that increases, I hear it sounds bigger. Okay, it sounds smaller when I do this. So then you automatically map that in your brain. So now you suddenly understand what that term means.
So when you went to school for music, it had nothing to do with
no technical stuff. No, not at all.
Wow.
Are you kidding me? I studied the classic composers. I majored in theory and composition. So I learned how to do things like write music for every kind of instrument. I did orchestration where I had giant charts and they would give us a melody and say, here, I want you to orchestrate this melody for 2 trombones, a French horn, 2 violins, a flute, this. And so what you were taught was how all those instruments worked, what their ranges were, how to write for them, what they're capable of and they're not capable of.
Is that still in your noggin?
Oh yeah, that stuff doesn't go away.
Wow.
But that's, again, it wasn't taught to me though. I just understood it because I listened to it. I know what range a flute sounds good in. It doesn't sound good below this note and it doesn't sound really good above that note. I know that in this range, you know, a regular B-flat flute sounds good in that range. And it's only from listening to it. It's the same as you would do. Look, you know.
All right, yeah, if it's out of tune, you know it's out of tune, right?
More than that, you know that you're not, well, actually, nowadays I was going to say, like, you're not going to play drums with your guitar, but you are going to play drums with your guitar. In those days, like, you know, it was really obvious. Like, you're not going to, you know, you would use sticks to hit a drum, right? Because it just makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So it's the same thing. It's just translated a different way. But it's the same knowledge. It comes organically from listening and forming an opinion about what you like and what you don't like. So you go for the stuff you like and you try to avoid the stuff you don't like. I mean, it's that simple. It sounds really like big and complex. The only reason it sounds that way is because I've been doing it so much longer. That's all. That's the only difference.
So from that first studio, when did you end up going into a actual professional studio?
Well, I mean...
The journey was long.
The journey was long and tiring, son. No. I went to, well, I mean, I built that small studio and I was able to produce enough material in those tiny studios to impress people that owned bigger studios to let me come in there and do stuff. That's all. So I made it into a 24-track studio, which was the standard for a long time. So, you know, rock bands like Queen and, like, I don't know, I picked Queen because I know they're still kind of popular. But pretty much any band that you listen to that came out of the 80s or 90s, they were all recorded in 24-track studios.
Thank you, Les Paul, for the multi-tracking.
Yes, thank you, Les Paul. You literally invented the recording studio.
I remember watching a documentary where they were talking about how some people were listening to his music for the first time, and he was explaining to them that it was all him.
Yeah.
And they were just like,
huh?
Yeah, it was
well,
like,
that's not possible.
This is not possible.
Sorry, but as far as I know, you can't be in more than one place at one time. But yeah, they didn't realize his, yeah, right. They had no idea, they couldn't conceptualize it.
So you were in a 24-track?
I sat watching him do that interview as a little kid and went, yep, I can see that, I get it. It just made so much sense.
You were aware of him back then?
I was aware, well, obviously it was well past the time I was born. It was old even for me to be watching it. But I remember hearing him explain multi-tracking and thinking, oh yeah, this is so obvious. And then my father didn't realize that his machine, he had a tape machine, that you could do something called sound on sound, where you could play back one track, let it bleed through the speakers, and then add something to it. So now you have 2 things on the track. Then you could play those back, add a 3rd thing, have 3 things. And you could build a song multi-tracking without having a multi-track.
How was the sound quality on that?
Terrible.
Yeah.
It got worse and worse and worse. The first thing that you recorded just became so quiet you could barely hear it in the distance. So then I got good. I realized, oh, so what I should do is the loudest, most percussive thing first. So you'd record the drums first, because they had the ability to last for a long time. Then bass, and you slowly build up, and you take the voice is always the last thing, you know. And that you instinctively understand. Now that becomes like the standard in any studio for recording all of a sudden.
Wow.
If you're going to multi-track. Lots of bands are just recorded live. They don't multi-track, but yeah.
Bands record, you think, live now still? Like the whole band in the studio?
Yeah. In fact, it was always the preferred method. Most bands I recorded, that's what they really wanted to play together. We isolated them so we could get control over the sound.
Okay.
But they played all at the same time.
Well, I can't remember what I was watching, where it was another documentary about a band, and they insisted on being in the same room because of just their vibe.
The feel, yeah, totally, yeah. Yeah, they just can't achieve the same level of excitement. And I understand. I mean, that's in terms of a band. I mean, they're used to being creative together simultaneously. They feed off one another in a live situation. But there are plenty of artists out there who prefer to just... Stevie Wonder never did that. You know, I mean, Stevie Wonder did Songs in the Key of Life, which is 2 albums of maybe the best songs ever recorded in history. I mean, as far as I'm concerned. And when he came to the studio, he had it all in his head. So every part. Like, he just knew it. So he came in and, like, to the engineers, he goes, hey, I have a great idea for an album. You know, it might be 2 albums. It's a lot of songs. I already know exactly what I want to do. And at this point, he was already famous enough that they just let him do whatever he wanted. And he would come in and play the drums for every song for a 2-album set with no other instruments, just him playing the drums. And the engineers are sitting there going, well, he's playing this great drum track, but they don't hear what he hears in his head. They don't know what it's going to. Then he comes back in and lays the bass down for every single song. Then he comes back in and plays the guitar for every single. Then he plays all the keyboards, clavinet, all this other stuff. And they're just hearing this thing coming up out of nowhere, this monster.
What year did he do that?
Oh, shoot. I'm going to say 77, 78, something like that. But songs in the key of life. I mean, you want the greatest lesson you could ever have in music creation, music production, artistry. The guy did every single thing himself. I think he even mixed a couple of the songs.
Good Lord.
Yeah, and without the use of his eyes, so just goes to show you.